podcast you're listening to is proud to be part of the Alberta Podcast Network powered by ATB. And so is mine. My name is Vanda, and I'm the host of Tight Ends Podcast. I don't know much about football, but I know a tight end when I see one. If you're looking for a sports podcast without all the stats and numbers and even facts and figures, join Tight Ends Podcast, the sports podcast for the rest of us. Every week we find out what's up with Gronk, and we always have a great tweet of the week so you can follow along. Go to albertapodcastnetwork.com to find more great podcasts like Tight Ends Podcast. And remember, clear eyes, tight ends can't lose.
Hey, welcome to Ed, a podcast about the teaching life. This is bonus episode 7, and I'm your host, Shane Lawrence. Ed is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network powered by ATB. And this is a bit of a different episode. It's a bonus episode. Recently, I had the chance to do a session at the NCTCA. It's the big conference, roundabouts where I live. And I did a session on podcasting as and for PD. So this is a recording of me giving that little talk. The second half of it was actually a live podcast I did with a few other folks, and that'll be coming out right around the beginning of March. But in the meantime, you can listen to this. If you want to follow along with my notes, you can go to bit.ly/theedpodcast. That's bit.ly/theedpodcast, and you can check out the notes that I used for this session. All right, here we go. That's better. Hi. So I am the host of the Ed Podcast, but of course I'm also a teacher. That's my main job. And before we get going, we had a little bit of a snafu with some tech stuff. So if you want to follow along with my presentation, I'm sorry I can't get it up on the wall in any way that's meaningful. But if you go to bit.ly/theedpodcast, you should find the slides that I'll be using today. Be careful when you spell the Ed Podcast because it puts 2 E's in a row, and I know that always makes my brain feel weird when I put it like that. So bit.ly/theedpodcast. So you'll find, basically the stuff that I will be saying. We're going to start out, well, actually, first I want to start out just by saying thank you to Karen, who has now left, and the Alberta Podcast Network, because they helped put all of this together. This is well beyond my abilities to organize, so I'm very thankful for that. Also to NCTCA, they bent over backwards to make this session happen. A lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. So here we are. To CKUA, obviously where we are, I think this is one of the best venues ever. This is amazing. And finally, I want to thank Dave Burgess Consulting. If you're familiar with the Teach Like a Pirate book, they have a few books that they've sent along so we can give those away for prizes later on. But it doesn't come, of course, without a cost, which is that when we go to do our live show, we always begin with wins and fails. So these are the things in the last month or so, I mean, you can go back further if you need to, where we have either emerged triumphant out of some sort of teaching situation or emerged in abject failure. And either of those is perfectly acceptable because we know that they happen all the time in our profession. So if you'd like to share one of those, it'll be part of the podcast when we actually go to put it out on iTunes later on, and we'll give you a book. And there you go. All right. So our nefarious plans. I'm going to talk so briefly to begin just about podcasting as PD. So that is the listening part, and then I'll be spending some time briefly talking about how to make one happen. And it doesn't look anywhere near this complex when you start, so don't worry about that if you're thinking about it, because this is even intimidating a little to me. Actually, really quick, just before I get rolling, how many of you actually listen to podcasts, let's say like once a week? Oh, wow. Oh, fantastic. Oh, great. And if it's okay. It's okay. Welcome. So, I'm going to have to strike a little balance here between how I don't want to be pandering, but you can see if you're following along the slides, what is a podcast? So a podcast is what you're about to witness. It's just radio on demand, and it's got every topic you could possibly imagine. While I am an education podcaster, my interests range far and wide, far beyond that. I've just thrown a few examples from the things I listen to. If you've ever heard of a podcast, you've probably heard of Serial. It's about, yeah, I see some nodding. Good. It's true crime, essentially. They're in their third season now. First season is fantastic. And at the risk of going off on a huge tangent where I just start blabbing about all the podcasts I love, if you like Serial, CBC has one out called Uncover, and they've done 2 seasons, and it is so good. So if you are looking for a new podcast, CBC's Uncover is amazing. It's just, yeah, very bingeable. The Truth is just like radio plays. They're making a comeback. 99% Invisible. If you've heard of 2 podcasts, you've heard of Serial and 99% Invisible. It's all about design, about the world around us in many different ways. I like video games, so I have one on there for gamers with jobs, which is like people like me who have children and also play video games. And of course, there's just, it's bottomless. I looked up Marie Kondo, and yeah, there's tons of, Spark Joy podcasts out there. There's everything. How do you listen? Personal preference, but I mean, on the slide, the biggest image I have is the one for Apple Podcasts, which of course is sort of the big one. But there's things like Pocket Casts, there's Google Play. Spotify is making a big move into podcasting this year, especially. Stitcher, Podbean. Normally I'd be pointing at the ones that because if you don't know what those images are on that slide, you're like, oh, what is he talking about? But all you need to do is just go into Google Play, just search up podcast. You'll find a ton of different apps. And I've found that on social media, nothing gets people going more than saying, hey, what podcast app would you recommend? And it's just like, blah, you'll get tons of recommendations and even a few fights. So it's not hard to find a good one that'll work for you. So moving forward, a single assumption then with podcasts is that you want to get better at what you do. That's why we're here to combine the idea of teaching and podcasting. I listen to podcasts as my own professional development because we get this 2 days a year plus a few other days here and there, and we all know that PD it varies in level of relevance and success for our own practice. I'm sure we've walked out of some sessions that maybe even this one, I don't even like, well, that was a waste of time, but hopefully not today. But podcasting as PD is great because it means you get to go exactly where you want to go. And there's a pile of education podcasts that are available. It's really time efficient. I know trying to set aside time for just learning stuff amidst the pile of marking that you have and the planning, and then the enormous list of other things that you need to do that don't have anything to do with teaching or planning. It really sucks up your time. So, most of my podcasting, I'd say 95% of it happens in my car. Most people complain about their commute. I love my commute. I wish it was longer. I really do, because that's how I get all my information. People are always saying, where do you learn this stuff? And I get annoyed at myself because I'm always like, well, this podcast I was listening to, blah, 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 blah. There's so much to learn. And it's very, very specific because it's such a big world. There's tons of just niche topics. If you teach social studies, there's podcasts about that. If you do tech, there's podcasts about that. There's podcasts about ESL, early childhood learning, international teaching, just a vast, vast variety. And again, whatever you are interested in. A few examples that I have. How are you doing, guys? Okay, good. Just checking. Just realized they're back there. A few examples that I have of podcasts that I do listen to. The Planning Period podcast is from a friend of mine that I met through podcasting. He's in Florida, and he does a really great conversation once a week with an educator, and they talk specifically about what is going wrong with education, what's going right with education. It's always one of these ones where I'm just, I have distinct memories of mowing the lawn in the summertime and listening to this one and just stopping mowing and just like shaking my fist saying, no, that's not right. Or, it definitely gets me going. So it's a really great way to be thinking about our profession. It is American, but there's plenty of crossover. 2 Pint PLC, I found that one because it combines several things that I'm interested in, namely education and beer. And this one is hardcore. Oh my goodness. These guys are all about best practices. So they do a ton of research. They actually read research papers and discuss them on the program. I got to be on the show. I felt a little out of my depth, but had a great time because, I read some academic papers and we just talked about them. Partial credit, if you like sports radio, this is the education version of that. That's enough said. Teachers on Fire. That's the thing. I'll mention that one. That one's actually another one for the Alberta Podcast Network. And I saw Karen smile about this. This is honestly like, it's not because it's part of the Alberta Podcast Network, but this is one that's not specifically about education. But what it is Karen and her daughter, and sometimes her son, they get together, and the daughter shares something about sort of youth culture, and they go deep, and they share stuff about like sort of the inner workings of YouTube, or the last one was about TikTok, which I had heard about like maybe 5 minutes before I heard this episode. So it's a really great way to sort of inform yourself about youth culture, and it is so handy as a teacher, because now I can talk to my kids about some of the things that are relevant to them, and you always get that look like, well, how do you know that? I'm like, well, it's a podcast I heard once, and away I go. The After School Club is a really new one, but it's a bunch of international teachers. So the panel is like, there's one person from England, one from, I think, United Arab Emirates, and somebody in Europe, and they all get together and just talking about international teaching. A Teacher's Shoes is, she's a new teacher in Ontario, so she focuses on the new teaching experience, and there's a lot of great podcasts about that. And there's also a bajillion more. I could just turn this into a great podcast. Does anyone else have any recommendations, anything that they've listened to that they really enjoy that maybe others might not have heard of? Just to throw it out there. Yeah.
Revisionist History was the one that sucked me in.
Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell, right? Revisionist History. Yeah, that's another one. That's if you know 3 podcasts, right? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, let's find out. Another Alberta Podcast Network show, right, about Edmonton local history. Right? Do you use that all in your classroom as well? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, and there are some really great podcasts that are about First Nations as well. Oh gosh, what's it called? I'm going to think about it. CBC put out an episode called New Fire. It's a series called New Fire. I don't think they're producing anymore, but it's worth going back into the library and listening to it, because it talks about youth culture in FNMI context. And really great listen if you want to kind of steep yourself in that a little bit more. Any others, or can we? Yeah, and I mean any of these podcasts, right? It doesn't have to be education focused. I felt guilt. I went through my phase of feeling kind of guilty for a while that I wasn't listening to enough education podcasts. But right on, yeah. This American Life, yeah. I've never listened to it. I know, right? But that's a lot of just stories, right? It's a very kind of story, personal interest kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, I'm sure we could probably keep on going, and maybe we'll just, after this, we can just kind of hang out and we can share podcasts. So lots of different ways to enrich our own professional practice through all of these different kinds of things that we can take in through podcasting. But creating, actually making a podcast. Has anyone actually thought, or anyone kind of toying with the idea of, maybe I could do a podcast? Maybe a few of you? Yeah, okay, cool. Right on. Well, here we go. Creating for PD is great because I remember I used to make fun of my university professor when we were always being asked to reflect, and it started to become, I kind of would start parodying the theme of reflecting. I got sick of it as a student teacher. And I shouldn't be admitting that out in here in public, but there it is. But so I would say that for a lot of my teaching career, I didn't spend a lot of time reflecting on my practice, not in any meaningful way. I mean, you might just walk out of a class and say, well, that sucked, or that was awesome, but that's about as far as I went. So podcasting is a really great way to find the time to really just talk about the profession. That's reflective practice, and that helps you understand what you're doing well. And also, I don't know about you, but as an educator, it's a pretty lonely profession. I mean, you talk about the people you work with, but I've been in the same building for 13 years, and there's people I have not seen teach. Do I work with them? So if I can grab them and say, hey, let's talk for half an hour, right? That opens huge doors, right? It creates a real web in our profession, helps create community. So podcasting is a really great opportunity. And I mean, it's not just within the building either. I have connected to other educators literally all over the world. I have a podcast I'm doing tomorrow with an educator in UAE, actually. And then the day after that, I'm talking to somebody in Ontario. And it's all over the place. It's also great because you get to share it. And your voice does matter. And again, people will start responding to you and listening to you. It doesn't happen right away. It's not like, I know our students think, if you put something on YouTube that 1 million people will watch it. No. But over time, you can build that community. And then, again, you've got this sort of on-tap set of people who can help you if you're having a problem. In fact, a lot of what not a lot, but a good chunk of what I'm presenting here today, I sourced from a lot of the other podcasters that I know. Getting started, you don't need all of this. But simply put, all you need is a phone to start with. And I was lucky. I actually had some hardware given to me, so I just realized, well, hey, I've got hardware. I can make a podcast. But honestly, I know plenty of podcasters who start with just a phone. If you want to throw some money at it, $60 will buy you a perfectly decent microphone that plugs straight into your computer, and you can start recording. The classic one is the Blue Snowball. I think you got one of those, right? Yeah. And they work really well. If you want to pull in your students, this is not a session about, podcasting with students. That's a whole other ball of wax. But if you want to try and pull in your students, then you can probably get your school to pay for the microphone. So that's pretty nice too. To record, Audacity is what a lot of people I know use. It's free. If you're in Elk Island, you can use Adobe Audition because that's free. If you're not in Elk Island, I don't know what your agreement is, but it works pretty well. Things like Zencaster or Zoom are both really great options for recording conversations with people remotely. And they're all free. All this stuff is free, which is fantastic. And then to actually publish it, to get it out into the world, there's, again, a lot of different options. I use something called Podbean simply because it's easy and I'm lazy. I'm so lazy, in fact, I didn't even want to set up that whole thing. I asked Joe to do it for me, and he's like, here's Podbean. I'm like, okay. And that's what I've been using ever since. But it works. It works great. Libsyn is sort of the king daddy of all the podcasting systems. Not as user-friendly, but very powerful. And if you want just simple, like all-in-one, like if you just want to use your phone, Anchor is a new service. It's totally free. It's got some limitations, but not nearly as much as you'd think. And it's literally the entire package in your phone. You download it, you record onto it, you publish, it's in Apple Podcasts. Done. So it's really, really easy to use. Finally, a few just little startup tips before you get going. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm going to guess a few of you probably have a blog that you haven't written anything on for a few years. Anybody? Yeah, I know I do. I don't even know where it is. I couldn't even access it. Pardon?
It's a fan. I don't even know if it
Yeah.
really even supports it.
It's probably on GeoCities, right, or something like that. Yeah, no, I know I've got at least 2 blogs out there somewhere. Yeah, we all start with a good intention. So it's good with podcasting. It's the same kind of thing. And I mean, I have people, I'll pick up a podcast that's new. I'm like, ooh, this is great. And then it just kind of peters out. Yeah, that's fine. But when you start, make sure that you've got a real passion for it. You really want to do it. And when you start, also record a few episodes, like 2 or 3 or 4. Try and stay a little bit ahead, because that way there's the week where something goes wrong, or maybe you just don't feel like it. Then you've got that thing in your back pocket and you can kick it out and kind of keep a schedule going. It took me 4 years to get to that point, just FYI. I started out doing 1 episode a month. Not even. No, I did 7 episodes my first year. Then I did 1 a month. Then I did 2 a month. And then I did 3 a month. And now I do 5 a month, I think. Yeah, because I do 1 check-in and 4 conversations a month. So, but it took me a long time to get there. It took me a long time to figure out I was even a podcaster. But nonetheless, I had the passion for it. That's what kind of kept me going. So have a schedule, and don't be afraid to fail. Experiment, because frankly, no one's listening when you start. So, except for a few people, and they're going to be kind when they're listening. But I didn't settle on a format for this show for 3+ years. I would say, after about 3.5 years, about where it's like, okay, this is what it's going to look like now. So always just tweaking, changing. And honestly, I'm still doing some little tweaks and changes to it now as well. But nonetheless, just try it. And it's free. Anyways, are there any questions here before we kind of dive into this half of the show where we actually start talking into a can? I use Audacity because it's part of the Adobe suite, and Elk Island gives it to the teachers for free. So it's wonderful. I said, Audition. Sorry. They both start with odd. Yes, Audition. Yeah. Yeah. The nice thing about podcasts is the length really isn't, it's not set. There's no one watching you, right? There's no one saying you have to be this long. So typically mine are between 30 and 45 minutes. I've gone as long as an hour and a half if the conversation really gets going and I don't have to pick up my kids from the day home. So, but typically 30 to 45. Yes, I do, because I'm part of the Alberta Podcast Network. So, yeah, I have an ad that I throw in the middle and the end. Yeah.
Sheena, what time did you move towards that sponsorship? Because I remember this last
Thank you.
sold out, like getting bigger.
Yeah. I'm shilling for the man. What, it was about a year and a bit ago? Because I joined just before Christmas 2017, I think. Yeah. It was actually one of my coworkers was like, hey, have you heard about this Alberta Podcast Network? And I said, no. And I went and looked it up and then pitched Karen my show. And she said, yeah. So here we are. Thank you, ATB, for making that possible. They do. The ATB is the main sponsor of the whole network. And then, so we always say, yeah. Well, you'll hear me say it. I'll say, welcome to this is oh, I don't even know. What do I say? This is bad. I always screw up when these guys are around because they're waiting for me to screw up. So, anyway, we'll get there. Any other questions? Any other? Yeah. That's a great question. I don't know. I know you. Oh, okay. Like for students and whatnot. Yeah, I actually don't know in terms of like hardware or whatever. You might be better in terms of just sound quality, just getting kids to use phones. I mean, I don't know what your school policy is with that though, but and then you don't ever always, yeah. But I know like things like Zencaster and Audacity will work with a Chromebook, so you can definitely record. Well, both Audacity and Zencaster, they're all web-based, 100%. So they should work in a Chromebook. Yeah. So it would just be a matter of how you get the sound into the machines. And I don't know if they would support like a USB mic, but certainly they have mics on them. Yeah. No. Yeah, to my shame, I have not really brought a lot of podcasting into my room. Other than if I find a topic that's interesting, I'll usually bring that in another way. I'll find a video that's related to it or that sort of thing to kind of get them interested in it. Because I find that I've tried a podcast a couple of times, but the students, you can see them the moment I start playing audio for them, they look like, I don't know, a baby in a pool or something. Like, what's going on? Yeah, for sure. So I always do the video thing. There are some podcasts that do exist as a video feed as well, but that's much more so higher end. One thing I did do with my Drama 7 students is last year I started doing it. I did turn the podcast thing around, and I had them making radio plays. So, which was fantastic. We kind of entered it into like we watched some videos about how they make movie or sound effects in movies. You want a bone crunch, you snap some celery, that kind of stuff. And I mean that's a fantastic image for a teacher to watch students going around with their phones and they're like tapping a heat radiator with a broom and they're like brushing their hand along the wall. And they're just like. So, and that turned out really well. So we got some really fun stuff there. So there is that. But yeah, I haven't. That's awesome though, using the podcast like that. Oh yeah, are you kidding? That's buy-in. That is buy-in right there, right? Yeah. Oh, I had kids like going out like punching textbooks. Like, it sounds so good, Mr. Lawrence. So, probably feels good too. Anyway, all right. So, I think we're gonna dive right in here then. All right, this special bonus episode was brought to you by ATB and the Branch for Arts and Culture. Creative minds need creative banking, and that's why ATB created the Branch for Arts and Culture. It's a branch that understands artists don't live by the rules or standard pay schedules, so you can be creative and you don't have to worry about your checking account. It's a creative space for creative types, and just one more way ATB will always be more than a bank. If you want to know more, you can head over to atb.com/thebranch. Before we head into the black, I just want to say a big thanks to Karen Unland and the APN for helping put this thing together. It was a lot of work, and there's a huge amount of support that made this happen. I couldn't be more pleased with the whole session. And thank you so much for listening. Thanks for those who came out. And if you want to get in touch or you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me at theedpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Twitter at theedpodcast. If you want to listen to more of Ed, you can head over to the website, theedpodcast.podme.com, or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcatcher of your choice. Just search up Ed Conversations. Ed can also be heard on Voice Ed Radio. It's 24-hour internet broadcasting devoted to the best ideas in education. Just head over to voiced.ca.
And thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.